Fornhan.Ponsan, enroll now and become part of the story. We have now reached the point where magic finally has gone into human hands, even when the first mage didn't teach all that much of use in the grand scheme of things. His contribution was mostly in the part of a person that bridged between those two worlds until a stable connection was built. He had already lived in solitary, and once he lived with magical creatures he quickly became like one. That simply spoke human language. He truly was more beast than man in the end, so humans still had to figure out most from zero. We had learned how to interact with magical creatures, but that didn't mean we knew how to use their magic easily. Magic is land power, and as such had limited use for now. Even for something as simple as lighting a flame, was it simply too much effort to get a magical creature to do that over lighting it another way. As such was the first age of magic more about enslaving the magical creatures to experiment on them, which is also known as the age of shackled magic. I already mentioned how magical creatures mostly do not care for others, regardless of if they are the same race or not. The lower developed they are, the more holds the statement then also true. But as a general rule, is it then that if it is another race, do they not care at all? Magic societies these days would probably care more about all that had happened during the time, but that is because they drastically jumped forward in evolution with human contact. No longer do we have a strictly antagonistic relationship, so all our development got dumped onto them. This in turn then means that any of this behavior these days would not only not go through unscathed from our rules, but also from magic societies. Now, during the time did this indifference however allow us to handle magic animals however we seemed fit. As the word implies, are they nothing more than animals who possess magic of any kind. To that end does it not even need to be any strong magic. Farm cows surely would feel better if living on an open meadow, but they lack the object impermanence to realize that there even is another way of living. Once we got them grown up within fences, would they just stay there without problems? The one difference is that due to their magic will it be far more easy to break regular fences. If they had what they needed, would they simply stay put, but if agitated would they easily break free. We long had perfected the craft of holding cattle, so it was only a matter of figuring out how to handle these other animals properly, now that we no longer feared being near them. This era then itself went through three phases: hubris, fear, and understanding. It was only natural that at first humans forgot the reason why they distanced themselves from magical creatures that much. We had gained an entirely new world to access. We got haughty from seeing how easy it was to entrap magic animals. We thought it was no different from normal farm animals, but the difference was that those had been bred over hundreds of years to suit our needs. Of the magic animals we had neither a true understanding on, nor were they evolved to live in captivity. As already said, was this development mostly on the nobility's end, as farmers would not have the luxury to try to test out this new, for certain far less efficient animal, but nobility didn't want the magical creatures just for the sake of owning them. Some, sure, they are collectors, but this was to serve towards the purpose of developing human magic, and those magical creatures that are slaves are that way because of their distinct lack of strong magic. Those hunting and capturing the magic animals were of course not the ones to experiment with them, so those on the experimentation side lacked the understanding on how things worked outside of the isolation of their chambers. This led them to pushing the hunters to get better and stronger magical creatures, and those hunters then also had no say in the matter, as they were nothing more than a peasant with special rights. All of this could only ever lead to one conclusion: With magical creatures like the Vulcan tiger being effectively no different to a normal rabbit, is it no surprise that humans would see that and then eventually go after the magical creatures they shouldn't. The probably biggest event, as far as we know, that resulted out of this lack of care is known as the Fairy Lake Massacre. There are many things of magical creatures seen as desirable, and in their greed that humans seek out to obtain fairies, of which lesser fairies can be used to create fairylands, which is nothing more than a flowery word for a prison for a fairy until it dies of hunger, thirst, or disease, just so that humans could have a bit more fancy lighting source over an oil lamp, a practice that naturally has been outlawed for a pretty long time now. So all of this started off when the Archduke of the region was in pursuit of expanding his riches, and power therefore. For that did he set out on plundering the fairy lake that was part of his dukedom. For that did he not simply send out his own army to do so. Where humans may be haughty, were they not dumb. He knew that it wouldn't be as easy as showing up and catching some, so instead he sent out a decree to anyone who would bring 10 fairies would be pardoned from taxes. You can imagine that this is something good, but probably not just how much value something like this held to people of the time. This was the equivalent of winning the lottery, but at first could people still not just run off and go after the fairies? Not only could they not leave their fields and cattle behind unattended, but also was it not as if they had even the means to capturing one. This meant that at first only few set out for this task. Of these, not a singular person returned successfully, capturing even one fairy, if even returning at all. With winter coming by, however, became people more desperate. No longer could they just wait up and see, seeking out with a mass of at least 50 people towards the lake. Now, fairies, as you probably know, are not aggressive species. They will play tricks and play around with us and magic societies, but they never harm anyone intentionally. To begin with, would they lack the means to do so, but fairy lakes are not solely inhabited by fairies. With how many people came to the lake did the fairies get driven away into hiding, and the story could have ended there. However, did the people not come here for fun? For them was this a matter as important as survival, to hunting the fairies and hunting them they shall. They knew that they would need some sort of trap to capture that amount, and would also be worth mentioning that while they did not work together, could they also not sabotage others, as they would also sabotage themselves, so they were forced into half cooperation. Where the fairies are now harmless beings, do they also attract other beings to live where they do? Just like the plover bird and the crocodile live mutually beneficial together, where one side is harmless and the other deadly. These other dwellers are in fact deadly, as they are the reason why it is so hard to get near Fairy Lake, as they slew every single villager that dared to near the water of the lake. While fairies' natural predators are frogs and spiders, do the predators of these then get drawn to where the massive amount of fairies are, as there are also massive amounts of their prey. There are also lots of other beneficial interactions they have, but that's not for me to explain. While some of these friends of fairies are not much larger than the frogs they eat, are others also dangerous to humans. Kelpies are horse-sized carnivores that drown any food they capture in water they live in, and the light of fairies attracts more than just your lonely moss. So the very thing that gives fairies so much problems makes living for kelpies far easier. This means that once the humans set their plan into motion and got near the water, did the kelpie catch them and drag them into their death. This is where humans for the first time realized that you cannot simply treat magical creatures on their own. It mattered also who else lived with them and why. This is common knowledge, as normal animals will also live together, and if one species is threatened are also all others needed to defend. but this is far, far more exaggerated with magical beings. Outside of some lower magic, animals are all magical beings more intelligent than animals are, and on top do they have similar enough languages that they can understand each other. Fairy lakes are just one of the many forms of beneficial groups that you can come across out in the wild. Groups, I might add, do not exist if you capture one individual and hold it captive to study how it supposedly acts. Many people had died, and those returning for certain had no interest in repeating this tragedy. But the nobles simply saw this as peasants acting amok. They simply wanted the fairies, therefore did they assemble an army to kill all the cabals living there. This was the first time in history when humans actively attacked magical creatures on a large scale, and this was also the first time in history that humans saw that these wild animals were not just some wild animals. It is hard to distinguish by just looks, but pixies and fairies are not the same. The key distinction is that fairies are magical beings, while pixies are magic animals. Most similar to fireflies, just that they use magic instead of chemical processes to create light. Fairies are not like that, and also just like bees to fairies all serve a queen known as the Great Fairy Mother, or any two-word combination out of these three. Or to be more precise, do non-fairies call her Jo Farako, with fairies obviously just saying Jew. This great fairy is not only physically larger than any other fairy, but on average are they far more mentally developed. So after what the humans did, being plainly obvious that this was more than just a one-time deal, did the great fairy act. Under normal circumstances, an event like this would mean that some wildfire or similar had forced animals to go after what they normally wouldn't. But humans aren't animals, and the great fairy knew that difference. Therefore did she in an untypical manner respond by sending out fairies to the source of the intruders, which led them to know what the humans were doing. In an attempt of self-preservation did she decide to take the humans first, to drive them away. Now, fairies have quite a lot of say in the forest, due to them inhabiting lakes, which are unavoidably necessary for all life, and with this power did not only the inhabitants of the lake, but a large amount of all kinds of magical creatures inhabiting that forest go after the humans. And with a surprise attack like this, that the humans definitely did not expect, did they get overwhelmed and completely crushed. After a large city being completely destroyed, with every living person there being killed, did humans quickly spread around this message: do not attack magical creatures. Despite being completely wiped off the map, were humans able to do so out of the context of what they could see? On the other hand, did the magical creatures simply return to their forest and continue living as they did before? While all humans quickly came to know of this event, did no magical creature hear of this for over 100 years. This is the difference in how humans and magical creatures work. This most importantly now meant that humans knew to fear, while they despite everything still had a clean slate with the magical creatures in large. So would this end the first phase of the first magic era? From hubris humans went back to fear, but with a far deeper understanding of the situation, as they did before all of these events had transpired. What humans now had to learn was how to deal with magical creatures without causing such problems. It was on us now to learn how to gain the access to magic on a far safer and a far more reliable way.